My name is Rebecca Williams, and at 32 years old, I thought I had found my dream job as a database engineer at FinSecure Solutions. I loved designing systems until the incident that changed everything. When my manager Marcus deleted my data integrity tests, calling them unnecessary, I knew disaster was coming. What I never expected was how quickly 14 minutes of runtime would bring a multi-million-dollar company to its knees. If you are watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you are tuning in from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I went from being silenced to saving an entire company. I graduated from MIT with a computer science degree 8 years ago, determined to make my mark in the tech world. After cutting my teeth at a couple of startups, I landed what I thought was my dream position at FinSecure Solutions, a rapidly growing financial technology company that handled data for several major banks. The interview process had been rigorous, with 5 rounds of technical assessments and personality fits. When the offer came through, I celebrated by treating myself to an expensive bottle of wine and calling my parents. They had always supported my tech ambitions, even when I was the only girl in my high school programming club. FinSecure occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass building in downtown Boston. My first day, I was given a tour of the open-concept workspace, with its ergonomic chairs, standing desks, and collaboration pods. The technology was cutting-edge, the coffee was excellent, and my team seemed genuinely excited to have me aboard. I was assigned a corner desk with a view of the harbor, 2 large monitors, and the fastest development machine I had ever worked with. My specific role was developing and maintaining data integrity systems and backup protocols. Financial data requires absolute precision, and a single corrupted entry can have cascading effects throughout interconnected systems. I took pride in building bulletproof validation checks that caught problems before they could propagate. Marcus Bennett was my direct manager, a tall man with a perpetually pressed shirt and a confident smile. In our first few meetings, he seemed impressed with my credentials and ideas. "Rebecca, we brought you in because your background in data security is exactly what we need for the Anderson project," he told me. During my first week, referencing the major banking system overhaul we were planning. 5 national banks are trusting us with their transaction data. Billions of dollars will flow through our systems daily. I felt a surge of pride at being entrusted with such responsibility. The Anderson project was massive, a complete rebuild of an aging transaction processing system that would serve multiple financial institutions simultaneously. Success would mean FinSecure becoming an industry leader. Failure could mean regulatory issues, financial losses, and damaged reputations. My teammates included Stephanie Powell, a senior developer with 15 years of experience who quickly became my mentor, and James Martinez, our brilliant but sometimes socially awkward system architect. We spent the first month in intensive planning sessions mapping data flows and identifying potential vulnerabilities. "I think we need to implement triple validation for any transaction over $50,000. I suggested during one early meeting, sketching out a flowchart on the whiteboard. "The computational cost is minimal compared to the security benefit." "Good thinking," Stephanie said, nodding appreciatively. Even Marcus seemed on board, making notes and asking relevant questions about implementation timelines. Those first few weeks were exhilarating. I felt like part of something important, a true collaboration of bright minds building something innovative and secure. My specialized knowledge was respected, and my suggestions were incorporated into the project roadmap. I started arriving early and staying late, not because anyone asked me to, but because I was genuinely excited about the work. The Anderson project would take 18 months to complete, according to the initial timeline. I was responsible for designing a comprehensive validation framework that would prevent bad data from entering the system, along with robust backup protocols to enable recovery in worst-case scenarios. I created detailed documentation, ran simulations of potential failure modes, and built automated test suites to verify data integrity under various stress conditions. "This is impressive work," James told me after reviewing my initial design documents. "Most people focus on the happy path, but you have accounted for dozens of edge cases." I took his comment as high praise. In my experience, system failures rarely came from the expected scenarios we planned for. It was always the unusual combinations of events, the edge cases, and unexpected inputs that caused catastrophic failures. My job was to anticipate those possibilities and prevent them from occurring, or at least ensure we could recover quickly if they did. As the project progressed from planning to implementation, I began to notice subtle changes in Marcus. What had initially seemed like confidence increasingly came across as arrogance. He started cutting people off in meetings, especially female team members. During one sprint planning session, he interrupted my technical explanation 3 times before I could finish my point. "Let us not get bogged down in excessive details," he said, dismissively moving the meeting along, without addressing my concerns about transaction validation protocols. Still, I remained optimistic. Every large project had its challenges, including personality conflicts. I focused on my work, believing that the quality of my code would speak for itself. The validation framework I was building would be the invisible guardian of data integrity, silently preventing countless problems from ever occurring. It was not flashy work that received immediate recognition, but it was essential to the long-term success of the project. I created a dedicated testing environment where I could simulate millions of transactions, deliberately introducing errors to ensure my validation routines caught them. The system needed to handle everything from simple typos to maliciously crafted inputs designed to exploit vulnerabilities. My test suite grew to over 10,000 automated scenarios, each verifying a specific aspect of data integrity. My backup system was equally comprehensive. I designed a multi-tiered approach with real-time transaction logging, hourly differential backups, and complete system snapshots every 24 hours. The backups were stored in 3 physically separate locations to protect against hardware failures or natural disasters. Recovery procedures were documented step by step with automated scripts to minimize human error during crisis situations. This was the work that gave me the most satisfaction, knowing that even in the worst-case scenario, we would have multiple paths to recovery. Little did I know how prophetic that concern would prove to be, or that my most important backup would be one I created against direct orders hidden away where only I could access it. 3 months into the Anderson project, we held a team-wide progress review. Each lead presented their component status, and when my turn came, I walked the room through the data validation framework I had built. The system now verifies input formatting checks for logical consistency across related fields and validates against historical patterns to flag anomalous transactions, I explained, showing slides with performance metrics. I have identified 23 potential corruption vectors and implemented specific protections for each one. I was proud of my work and expected questions or perhaps even compliments. Instead, Marcus frowned and cut my presentation short. "This seems excessive, Rebecca," he said, checking his watch. "Are all these validation layers really necessary? They will add latency to transaction processing." "The performance impact is minimal," I countered, bringing up my benchmark results. "Average validation time is 12 milliseconds per transaction, well within our requirements. And the security benefit is substantial." Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "Let us move on to the user interface updates. We are running behind on those." I returned to my seat, feeling confused and slightly embarrassed. The validation system was functioning exactly as specified in our requirements. Why was Marcus suddenly concerned about performance impacts that my testing had already proven negligible? Later that week, I received a calendar invitation for an executive review of the Anderson project. Strangely, it was quickly followed by a cancellation notice specifically for me. When I asked Marcus about it, he explained that they wanted to keep the meeting focused on high-level progress rather than technical details. I mentioned this to Stephanie over lunch. "Is it normal to exclude the data security lead from executive reviews?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Stephanie frowned. "No, that is unusual, especially for a financial system where data integrity is paramount." She lowered her voice. "Between us, Marcus has been acting strangely lately. There is a lot of pressure from above to accelerate the timeline." The following Monday, I discovered that Marcus had presented my security framework to the executives as his own innovation. James let this slip during a code review, not realizing I had been excluded from the meeting. The VPs were very impressed with the multi-layered validation approach Marcus presented, he said, especially the anomaly detection for potential fraud patterns. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Did Marcus mention that I designed that system? James looked uncomfortable. Not specifically, no. He presented it as a team achievement under his direction. During the next all-hands meeting, I tried to reclaim some ownership by asking a question that highlighted my contribution. Regarding the validation framework I designed, Have we received any feedback from the client banks about the security approach? Marcus gave me a cold look. The security implementation was a collaborative effort that I oversaw. And yes, the clients are satisfied with our approach. He quickly called on someone else, cutting off any follow-up. That evening, I stayed late reviewing the project timeline. Marcus had committed us to increasingly aggressive deadlines without consulting the technical leads. Our initial 18-month plan had somehow compressed to 14 months with no reduction in scope. Most concerning was the testing phase, which had been shortened from 8 weeks to just 3. I documented my concerns in a detailed email to Marcus, copying our project management office. The compressed testing timeline creates significant risk, I wrote. Data integrity validation requires thorough stress testing under various load conditions. 3 weeks is insufficient for the transaction volumes we expect in production. His response was terse, noted, "We will make it work." Over the next few weeks, I noticed a pattern of being excluded from key decision meetings. When I did attend, my input was frequently dismissed or minimized. Despite this, I continued working diligently on the validation systems, often staying late to ensure everything was properly implemented. On my own initiative, I began developing a comprehensive backup system that went beyond our standard protocols. This included transaction-level recovery capabilities that could restore the system to any point in time with minimal data loss. I documented everything meticulously, creating step-by-step recovery procedures that anyone could follow in an emergency. "This is impressive," Stephanie commented when I showed her the backup architecture. "But why are you putting in all these extra hours? Is this part of your assigned tasks?" "Not explicitly," I admitted. "But I have a bad feeling about the direction things are heading. Marcus is cutting corners on testing and validation. If something goes wrong, we will need robust recovery options." Stephanie nodded sympathetically. "Document everything, and keep copies of your emails raising concerns." I followed her advice, maintaining a folder of all my communications about project risks. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the office grew increasingly tense as the deadline approached. Marcus began holding daily acceleration meetings where he pressured team members to find ways to compress their timelines further. During one such meeting, he publicly criticized my work. "Rebecca, your validation routines are taking up too much processing time. We need to streamline these checks to meet our performance targets." "The validation only adds milliseconds per transaction," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Removing these checks would create unacceptable risk." "I think I will be the judge of what constitutes acceptable risk," he said coldly. "Please provide a list of validation checks that can be safely removed by tomorrow morning." That night, I could barely sleep, torn between professional integrity and team loyalty. I compiled the requested list, but categorized the checks by risk level, strongly recommending that none of the critical validations be removed. My email emphasized the potential consequences of data corruption, including financial losses and regulatory violations. Marcus responded by removing me from several key project channels and reassigning some of my tasks to junior developers who lacked experience in security protocols. When I attempted to discuss this with him privately, he accused me of being too rigid and not a team player. "The financial industry moves fast, Rebecca," he said. "Sometimes we need to prioritize delivery speed over theoretical security concerns." "There is nothing theoretical about data corruption," I insisted. "Once bad data enters the system, it can propagate and cause cascading failures that are extremely difficult to correct." He dismissed me with a wave. "I've been managing financial systems for 12 years. I understand the risks." Self-doubt began creeping in despite my technical confidence. Was I being overly cautious? Were my concerns truly excessive, as Marcus suggested? I reached out to a former colleague, Catherine, who now worked at a different financial institution. "Trust your instincts," she told me during our phone call. "Financial data integrity is not somewhere to cut corners. The regulatory consequences alone could sink a company." Her validation strengthened my resolve. I continued developing and refining my validation systems despite the growing hostility from Marcus. I also worked on my backup system during evenings and weekends, creating a robust recovery framework that could salvage the system even in worst-case scenarios. It was during this period that Marcus made the comment that would later become infamous. During a resource allocation meeting, he questioned the server space dedicated to my backup system. "Do we really need all these redundant backups?" he asked. "It seems like a waste of server space and computational resources." "The backups are essential for disaster recovery," I explained. "They provide multiple restoration points in case of system failure or data corruption." He shook his head. "We have standard company backups already. Your additional layers are excessive and expensive. Please scale this back immediately." I attempted to explain the inadequacy of the standard backups for a system of this complexity, but he cut me off. "This is not up for debate. The decision has been made." Officially, I complied with his directive, reducing the visible backup footprint. Unofficially, I maintained a separate comprehensive backup system on a secure server that I personally managed. It was my insurance policy against what I increasingly saw as inevitable disaster. I did not tell anyone about this hidden backup, not even Stephanie. If questioned, I could honestly say I was just being thorough in my documentation, archiving my work for future reference. As we approached the final development phase, I made one last attempt to raise my concerns to higher management. I requested a meeting with our CTO, but his assistant informed me he was too busy with acquisition talks to meet before the Anderson project launch. Instead, I sent a comprehensive email detailing specific vulnerability scenarios and their potential impact. I never received a response. The last straw came during my performance review. Marcus rated me as needs improvement in teamwork and adaptability, citing my excessive focus on edge case scenarios and resistance to timeline adjustments. "But those edge cases are exactly where critical failures occur," I protested. "Rebecca," he said with exaggerated patience, "sometimes I think you lose sight of the forest for the trees. We are building a business system, not launching a space shuttle. Some level of risk is acceptable in exchange for market responsiveness." I left that meeting knowing that the project was headed for disaster. The only questions were when it would happen and how bad it would be. 6 weeks before the scheduled launch, tensions reached a breaking point during a sprint planning session. Marcus announced a further compression of the testing timeline, reducing it from 3 weeks to just 10 days. "This is impossible," I said, unable to contain my frustration. "We cannot adequately test data integrity across 5 integrated banking systems in 10 days. Marcus fixed me with a cold stare. "If you cannot work within the parameters of this project, perhaps you should reconsider your position." The room fell silent. He had essentially threatened my job in front of the entire team. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, but I maintained my composure. "I am expressing a professional assessment of technical risk," I said evenly. "The timeline does not allow for proper validation testing." "Your concerns have been noted," he replied dismissively. Now moving on to the API integration schedule. After the meeting, several colleagues expressed private support but admitted they were afraid to speak up. "Marcus has the ear of the executive team," James explained. "And with the funding round coming up, everyone is focused on hitting the launch date." That night I worked until midnight, implementing additional safeguards that could be deployed without Marcus noticing. I created background validation processes that would run silently, logging issues without interrupting the main transaction flow. It was not ideal, but it might catch critical problems before they spread too far. The next confrontation came during a code review when Marcus questioned the extensive error handling in my validation modules. "Why are we wasting processing cycles on conditions that will never occur?" he demanded. "This code path checks for corrupted timestamps, but our input systems prevent invalid dates." "Defense in depth is standard practice in financial systems," I explained. "We cannot assume all upstream validations will catch every problem. Each layer needs its own checks." "Remove the redundant validations," he ordered. "We need to optimize performance." I knew he was wrong, dangerously wrong, but direct confrontation was clearly not working. I began documenting everything meticulously, creating a paper trail of rejected security recommendations. Each time a validation check was removed, I noted it along with the potential consequences. Meanwhile, I continued developing my hidden backup system during off hours. I implemented a sophisticated transaction logging mechanism that captured every database change in real time, storing the logs in an encrypted format on my secure server. The system could rebuild the entire database state at any point in time, transaction by transaction if necessary. Creating and maintaining this shadow backup system required significant technical creativity. I had to ensure it captured all necessary data without impacting system performance or appearing in resource monitoring tools. I wrote custom compression algorithms to minimize storage requirements and clever routing scripts to avoid detection. 2 weeks before launch, Marcus made the comment that would later become infamous throughout the company. During a resource utilization review, he pointed to my backup system allocation. "This backup infrastructure is ridiculous overkill," he declared. "It is a waste of server space and computational resources. Scale it back by 80% immediately." "But the recovery capabilities," I began. "We have standard company backups," he interrupted. "Your additional layers are unnecessary. This is not a request, it is a directive." Officially, I complied, reducing the visible backup system. Unofficially, I maintained my comprehensive shadow backup now, more convinced than ever that it would eventually be needed. As launch approached, I made one final documented attempt to raise concerns to leadership. I prepared a comprehensive email to the executive team, detailing specific technical vulnerabilities and their potential business impacts. I included projected financial losses in various failure scenarios and specific recommendations to mitigate each risk. "Financial data systems require extraordinary caution," I wrote. "A single corrupted transaction can propagate through interconnected systems, potentially affecting thousands of customer accounts. Recovery from such corruption can take days or weeks, during which time customer confidence and regulatory compliance are severely compromised." I sent the email on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, it had been forwarded back to Marcus with a note saying the executive team had full confidence in the project leadership. Marcus called me into his office immediately. "This end run around proper channels is completely unacceptable," he said, his voice cold with anger. "You have directly undermined my authority and created unnecessary concern among the leadership. I raised these issues to you repeatedly," I responded, struggling to keep my voice steady. "They were dismissed without proper consideration. Because they are overblown. Your catastrophic scenarios are theoretical edge cases that will never occur in reality." He leaned forward across his desk. "This is your final warning, Rebecca. Fall in line, or we will have to reevaluate your future with this company." The threat was explicit now. I left his office shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. 8 months of work on this project. Countless late nights and weekends, all while being systematically undermined and dismissed. My professional judgment, backed by years of experience and technical expertise, was being treated as paranoia. That night, I called Catherine again, seriously considering resignation. "I cannot be part of this disaster," I told her. "They are about to deploy a financial system with critical security flaws." "Document everything," she advised, "and make sure your resume is updated, but consider staying through the launch. If things go as badly as you expect, you will want to be there to help with recovery, and your expertise will suddenly become very valuable." Her advice made sense. I updated my resume but decided to remain through the launch. Meanwhile, I verified that my shadow backup system was functioning perfectly, capturing every transaction and database change in real time. The final week before launch was a blur of activity. The team worked around the clock to fix last-minute bugs and performance issues. Marcus was everywhere, pushing people to work faster, dismissing concerns, and constantly reminding everyone of the immovable deadline. I focused on implementing what protections I could without drawing his attention. Small validation checks embedded within other functions, subtle logging enhancements that would help with forensics if things went wrong, and final verification of my shadow backup system. The day before launch, I sent one last email to Marcus. It was brief and professional. "As the data integrity lead on this project, I must formally register my concern that the system has not undergone sufficient validation testing. Critical data corruption scenarios remain untested. I strongly recommend postponing the launch until proper testing can be completed." His response was equally brief, concerns noted. "Launch proceeds as scheduled." I forwarded both emails to my personal account, then went home to try to get some sleep before what I was increasingly certain would be a disaster. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I ran through recovery scenarios in my mind, planning how I would respond when the system inevitably failed. The question was not if but when, and how badly. Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before the scheduled launch. I wanted to run a final check on my validation systems and ensure my shadow backup captured the pre-launch state perfectly. But when I tried to access the development environment, my credentials were rejected. Thinking it might be a system glitch, I tried again. Same result. I called our system administrator, who sounded uncomfortable. Yeah, about that. Marcus had all access permissions reset last night. Only the deployment team has access to the environments now. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. But I need to verify the data integrity components before launch. Sorry, Rebecca. Direct orders from Marcus. He said to tell you that all systems have been finalized and locked for deployment. I immediately went to my workstation and began reviewing the code repositories to see what changes had been made. What I discovered left me breathless with shock. All of my data integrity tests had been deleted. Not just disabled or commented out, but completely removed from the codebase. 6 months of meticulously crafted validation checks, error handling routines, and corruption safeguards all gone. The deletion commit had a simple comment. Performance optimization removing redundant validation. The timestamp showed it had happened at 11:20 p.m. last night, long after most of the team had gone home. I checked further and discovered that the standard backup retention policy had been temporarily modified, purging the repository history that would have allowed restoration of the deleted code. This was not negligence. This was deliberate sabotage of safety systems. I stormed to Marcus's glass-walled office where he was meeting with the deployment team. Without knocking, I pushed the door open. You deleted all the validation code, I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. Every single integrity check and safeguard I built. Why? Marcus dismissed the deployment team with a gesture, then turned to me with cold composure. Those excessive validations were creating unacceptable performance overhead. The system needs to process 10,000 transactions per second at peak load. Those validations prevented data corruption. Without them, a single bad transaction could poison the entire database. He shrugged. Theoretical risks. We have standard input validation at the application layer. Your additional checks were redundant and costly. They were not redundant. They caught different classes of errors at different stages of processing. I struggled to make him understand. Financial data requires multiple validation layers. The decision has been made, Rebecca. His tone was final. The optimized code meets our performance requirements while maintaining adequate security. Your approach was excessive and would have created unacceptable latency. Then at least let me implement a minimal validation layer before launch, I pleaded, shifting to damage control. Number. The code is locked for deployment. Any changes now would require a full regression test cycle that we do not have time for. He stood up, indicating the conversation was over. I suggest you focus on your post-launch monitoring duties. I left his office in a state of numb disbelief. This went beyond incompetence into willful endangerment of the system. I tried to access the deployment environments again, hoping to implement emergency validation, but my credentials remained revoked. In desperation, I went to Stephanie, explaining what had happened. Her face grew increasingly alarmed as I detailed the deletions. This is insane, she said. Those validations were critical safeguards. Can you help me get emergency access to add at least minimal checks before launch? She shook her head. Marcus has locked everything down. Only his deployment team has access, and they are all his loyal supporters. She hesitated. Rebecca, you should know that Marcus has been telling people you have become obsessed with theoretical security risks at the expense of system performance. He has been undermining your credibility for weeks. The betrayal stung, but it was not entirely surprising. Will you back me up if things go wrong? Of course, she promised. I have seen your work. Those validations were essential, not excessive. At 9 a.m., Marcus called an all-hands meeting to announce the imminent launch. Standing at the front of the conference room, he beamed with confidence. Today marks a milestone for FinSecure Solutions, he declared. The Anderson project will revolutionize transaction processing for our banking clients. In 30 minutes, we go live with the most advanced financial platform on the market. I raised my hand, determined to make one final public attempt. Have the data integrity concerns been addressed? The validation systems were removed last night. Marcus gave me a warning look. All necessary validations are in place. The optimizations were approved by the technical committee. This was a lie, as no such approval had occurred. But before I could challenge it, he continued, "Let us focus on the success ahead, not rehash settled technical decisions." The room's attention moved on as he outlined the launch sequence. I sat there feeling physically ill, knowing what was about to happen, but powerless to prevent it. At 9:30 a.m., Marcus ceremoniously initiated the deployment sequence. Large monitors around the room displayed the progress as systems came online. The deployment team worked efficiently following the rehearsed sequence. Database servers initialized, application servers came online. Load balancers activated. By 9:45 a.m., the system was fully deployed. A cheer went up from the team as the monitoring dashboards showed the first transactions beginning to process. Marcus looked triumphant, moving around the room, accepting congratulations and slapping backs. I sat at my monitoring station watching with dread as the transaction volume began to ramp up. Everything looked normal for the first few minutes. The system was processing cleanly, performance metrics well within expected parameters. Then at 9:53 a.m., 8 minutes after launch, I noticed the first anomaly. A small latency spike in the transaction queue. It could have been nothing, just a momentary network congestion. But I knew better. It was the first sign of data validation issues. I leaned forward, scrutinizing the logs. There it was, a transaction with unusual character encoding the kind my deleted validation checks would have caught and quarantined. But without those safeguards, the malformed data had entered the system. For the next 6 minutes, I watched in helpless horror as the corruption began to spread. The monitoring tools showed nothing obviously wrong, yet the subtle poison spreading silently through interconnected tables. Marcus continued his victory lap, oblivious to the disaster unfolding beneath the seemingly smooth operation. At exactly 9:59 a.m., 14 minutes after launch, it happened. A critical customer record in the main user table encountered the corrupted data element. Without proper validation, the system attempted to process the invalid entry, triggering a cascade of failures across related tables. The monitoring dashboard suddenly lit up with alerts. Transaction processing rates plummeted. Error counts spiked dramatically. Database connection pools began to exhaust as error handling routines trapped in recursive loops. "What is happening?" Marcus demanded, rushing to the monitoring station. "Data corruption," I said simply. Exactly as I warned. A malformed transaction has corrupted the main user table. "Fix it," he ordered. "The validation routines that would have prevented this were deleted," I reminded him. "And the safeguards that could have isolated the corruption were removed." The room erupted into chaos as alerts continued to multiply. Support lines began ringing as the first banking clients noticed transaction failures. Marcus tried to project calm confidence, assuring everyone this was just a minor launch hiccup that would be resolved momentarily. But I knew better. This was just the beginning of a catastrophic system failure that would soon affect millions of banking customers and potentially cost the company millions of dollars. And it had all been completely preventable. The first 14 minutes after deployment had seemed deceptively smooth. The system processed initial transactions without apparent issues, performance metrics looked good, and the monitoring dashboards showed all green status indicators. Marcus had been walking around the launch room with a satisfied smile, accepting congratulations from team members and executives alike. "See all that worry for nothing," he had said pointedly as he passed my monitoring station at the 9-minute mark. I had not responded, too focused on the subtle warning signs already appearing in the transaction logs. A slight processing lag in the queue at minute 8. Unusual character encoding in a transaction that should have been rejected but instead was processed. These were the early symptoms of the disaster I had predicted. At precisely 14 minutes after launch, 9:59 a.m., the system encountered the fatal error. A corrupted entry hit the main user table, the central reference point for all customer information. Without my validation checks to catch and quarantine the bad data, the corruption spread instantly through related tables via foreign key relationships. The monitoring dashboards transformed from reassuring green to alarming red as alerts triggered across the system. Transaction processing rates dropped from thousands per second to near zero. Database connection pools exhausted as error handling routines became trapped in recursive loops. Application servers began crashing as they tried to process increasingly corrupted data. "What is happening?" Marcus demanded, the blood draining from his face as he watched the cascade of failure alerts. "Data corruption in the main user table," I explained, forcing my voice to remain professional despite the vindication I felt. The validation routines that would have prevented this were deleted yesterday. The first client call came through at 10:01 a.m., just 16 minutes after launch. The largest bank in our network reported that customer transactions had stopped processing and account balances were showing errors. 2 minutes later, the second bank called with reports of duplicate transactions appearing in some accounts, while others showed zero balances. Marcus tried to maintain control, directing the emergency response team to restart application servers and clear cache. Standard recovery procedures, he ordered, projecting confidence he clearly no longer felt. I watched silently, knowing these measures would be ineffective. The corruption was in the database itself, not in the application layer. Restarting servers would only connect them to already corrupted data, perpetuating the problem. By 10:15 a.m., all 5 client banks had reported critical failures. Customer service lines were flooded with calls from panicked account holders seeing incorrect balances. Social media was beginning to light up with complaints. The situation was escalating from technical failure to public relations crisis. Our CTO, Jennifer Bailey, arrived at 10:20 a.m., summoned by increasingly desperate calls from the operations team. She took one look at the monitoring dashboards and demanded an explanation. "What am I looking at here?" "The system is completely non-functional." Before Marcus could speak, I stepped forward. "Data corruption in the main user table has cascaded through related systems. Without proper validation checks, a malformed transaction was processed rather than rejected, corrupting the database." "Where are the validation safeguards?" Jennifer asked. "They were removed last night as part of a performance optimization," I said, careful to keep my tone neutral despite the anger I felt. Jennifer turned to Marcus. "Is this true? You removed data validation from a financial processing system." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "The validations were creating unacceptable latency. We implemented a streamlined approach that should have been sufficient." "Should have been," Jennifer repeated incredulously. "We are looking at complete system failure here." At 10:30 a.m., the first attempts at standard recovery failed. The operations team tried to restore from the most recent official backup, only to discover that it too contained corrupted data. The corruption had been present but dormant in the test environment for hours, before deployment, silently poisoning even the pre-launch backups. "The backups are corrupted," the operations lead announced, his voice tight with stress. "Standard recovery is not possible." The room fell into stunned silence. Without valid backups, the situation had moved from serious to potentially catastrophic. Millions of financial transactions were frozen in an indeterminate state. Customer account data was increasingly unreliable. The regulatory implications alone were staggering. By 11 a.m., the crisis had escalated to board level. The chairman and 3 board members joined an emergency video conference, their faces grim on the large display in the main conference room. Representatives from the 5 client banks were also present, demanding immediate resolution. "We are looking at incalculable financial and reputational damage," the chairman stated bluntly. "What are our recovery options?" Marcus attempted to project confidence. "We are implementing emergency recovery protocols. The system should be operational within hours." The bank representatives were not reassured. "Our customers cannot access accurate account information," the CEO of First National pointed out. "Every minute this continues, we lose trust that took decades to build." I sat silently at the back of the room, watching the crisis unfold. Part of me felt vindicated, having warned precisely of this scenario, but professional responsibility outweighed personal satisfaction. I knew the solution, but waited for the right moment to reveal it. By 11:30 a.m., after multiple failed recovery attempts, desperation had set in. Marcus had tried every standard procedure without success. Each approach failed because the underlying data was corrupted beyond repair through normal means. "We may need to consider rebuilding from transaction logs," he finally suggested, his voice betraying his uncertainty about whether this was even possible. "That would take days," one of the bank representatives objected, "and would likely miss transactions from the corruption timeframe." The room fell into tense silence. The financial impact was growing by the minute. Conservative estimates already put the damage at hundreds of millions of dollars in lost transactions, recovery costs, and potential regulatory fines. Then Marcus looked across the room, and his eyes met mine. I saw the moment of realization dawn on his face, followed quickly by what appeared to be a combination of hope and dread. He knew I might have a solution, but asking for my help would mean admitting he had been catastrophically wrong. For a brief moment, I considered letting him suffer longer a petty revenge for months of dismissal and undermining. But professional ethics won out over personal grievance. These were real people's financial lives being affected, not just abstract data points. Before I could speak, however, Marcus approached me, his face ashen. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "tell me you have something. Anything." I met his gaze steadily. I maintained a separate backup system, one that captures transaction-level details with point-in-time recovery capabilities. Hope flickered in his eyes, immediately followed by suspicion. But I ordered all excessive backups scaled back. I complied with the official directive. I said carefully, "This was a personal archive I maintained for documentation purposes." He processed this for a moment, understanding the subtext. I had directly disobeyed his order, but in doing so, had potentially saved the company. "Will it work? Can you restore from this backup?" "Yes," I said confidently. "It captures every transaction with timestamp validation. We can rebuild the entire database state from before the corruption occurred." Marcus hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Do it." But instead of proceeding immediately, I shook my head. "I need formal authorization. From you, the CTO, and preferably the board." He understood what I was really asking for, public acknowledgement that my approach had been right all along. His jaw tightened, but desperation outweighed pride. "Fine." 5 minutes later, I found myself in the main conference room, facing the board of directors, executive team, and representatives from 5 major banks. Marcus stood at the front of the room, visibly uncomfortable. "Rebecca Williams has informed me that she maintained a comprehensive backup system that may allow full recovery," he announced, despite my previous concerns about the resource allocation for such extensive backups. The board chairman leaned forward. "Miss Williams, can you restore the system from this backup?" "Yes," I said confidently. "I implemented a transaction-level logging system that captures every database change with integrity verification. We can rebuild to any point in time, including immediately before the corruption occurred." "How long will recovery take?" one of the bank CEOs asked. "Approximately 30 minutes for initial restoration, followed by validation testing," I explained. "The system could be operational within 2 hours." The relief in the room was palpable. Marcus, however, looked like he was preparing to swallow something extremely bitter. "I need to be clear about something," he said, his voice strained. "This backup system exists because Rebecca maintained it despite my direct order to scale back what I referred to as," he struggled visibly, "a waste of server space I provided," quoting his exact words from the week before. He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Yes. I was wrong. Catastrophically wrong." The chairman of the board fixed Marcus with a cold stare. "We will discuss the implications of these decisions later. For now, Miss Williams, please proceed with the recovery immediately." I was given emergency authority over the recovery operation with the entire technical team at my disposal. As I left the conference room to begin the process, I heard Marcus being subjected to intense questioning from the board about his decision-making. The next 2 hours were a blur of focused technical activity. I accessed my hidden backup server, which had faithfully recorded every transaction in the system, untouched by the corruption that had infected the main databases. The recovery process was complex, requiring careful sequencing to rebuild the database state transaction by transaction up to the exact moment before corruption occurred. As I worked, I was acutely aware of the dozens of people watching anxiously, including executives, bank representatives, and team members. The pressure was enormous, but I had rehearsed this scenario in my mind dozens of times, preparing for exactly this situation. At 1:45 p.m., just over 4 hours after the crash, I initiated the final validation sequence. The restored database passed every integrity check. The application servers reconnected successfully. Test transactions processed correctly. "The system is restored," I announced. "All data is intact and validated." We can begin processing transactions again." A cheer erupted from the technical team. The bank representatives looked visibly relieved. The board chairman nodded approval. "Miss Williams," he said, "you have saved this company from what would have been a catastrophic failure. On behalf of the board, thank you." I accepted the thanks professionally, but inside, a warm satisfaction spread through me. After months of being dismissed and undermined, my expertise had been validated in the most definitive way possible. As the crisis mode began to wind down, I noticed Marcus standing alone at the edge of the room, his career and reputation in tatters. Despite everything, I felt a small twinge of sympathy. He had made catastrophically bad decisions, but I understood the pressures that had led to them. The drive for faster delivery, the pressure to meet market demands, the corporate culture that often valued speed over safety. But in financial systems, as in so many critical technologies, there can be no compromise on data integrity. The 14 minutes of runtime that brought down the system had proven that beyond any doubt. And as I watched the system come fully back online, transaction by transaction, I knew that the real victory was not personal vindication, but professional validation of a principle I had always believed in when it comes to data integrity. There are no shortcuts. The hours following the successful recovery were a whirlwind of activity. Technical teams monitored the restored system with heightened vigilance. Bank representatives verified transaction integrity, and the executive team handled crisis communications with clients and the media. I remained at my workstation, running additional validation checks and monitoring for any signs of lingering issues. At 3 p.m., Jennifer Bailey, our CTO, approached my desk. "Rebecca, the board wants to see you in the executive conference room." I followed her through the office, aware of the looks of respect from colleagues who had witnessed the recovery operation. Just days earlier, many of these same people had avoided eye contact, unwilling to be associated with someone who had fallen out of favor with management. The executive conference room held the full board of directors, the CEO, and representatives from our banking clients. Marcus sat alone at the far end, his posture rigid with tension. "Miss Williams," the board chairman began as I took my seat, "we have been reviewing the events that led to today's system failure. We understand that you repeatedly warned about the risks of removing data validation safeguards and were overruled by your manager." I nodded. "Yes, that is correct. I documented my concerns in multiple emails and technical assessments. And the backup system that saved us today was maintained by you despite explicit instructions to discontinue it." "Yes," I acknowledged. I felt a professional responsibility to maintain recovery capabilities, even though I had been directed to scale them back. The chairman turned to Marcus. "Mr. Bennett, would you like to address this?" Marcus cleared his throat, his face pale. "I made a catastrophic error in judgment," he said stiffly. "I prioritized performance metrics and delivery timelines over system integrity. I dismissed valid technical concerns raised by Miss Williams repeatedly over several months." "And the deletion of validation safeguards," the chairman prompted. Marcus looked down at the table. "I authorized the removal of data validation routines that Miss Williams had implemented, believing them to be redundant and performance-intensive. This decision directly led to today's system failure." The room was silent for a moment. Then the chairman spoke again. "The board has made several decisions effective immediately," he announced. "First, all of Miss Williams' security and validation protocols will be fully reinstated before the system returns to production. Second, a comprehensive security review will be conducted across all company systems, with Miss Williams leading that effort." I straightened in my chair, surprised by this sudden authority. Additionally, the chairman continued, "We are creating a new position of Chief Data Security Officer reporting directly to the board. Miss Williams, we would like to offer you this role with appropriate compensation adjustments and team resources." The promotion was as unexpected as it was gratifying. After months of being marginalized, my expertise was being recognized at the highest level. "Thank you," I said, maintaining professional composure despite my elation. "I would be honored to accept that position." "As for you, Mr. Bennett," the chairman turned to Marcus, "you are being reassigned to the Business Analytics Department, where you will have no authority over critical systems or security protocols." Marcus nodded stiffly, his career effectively derailed by his catastrophic misjudgment. The meeting concluded with detailed discussion of recovery verification and client communications. As we filed out, One of the bank's CEOs stopped to shake my hand. "Your foresight saved millions of dollars and our customers' trust today," he said. "In the financial industry, data integrity is everything." Back at my desk, I found myself the center of attention as colleagues stopped by to congratulate me or simply express relief that the system had been restored. Stephanie gave me a quick hug. "I knew you were right all along," she whispered, "and I have the emails to prove I supported you." I smiled. "I know you did, Stephanie. I appreciated it more than you know." James approached next, looking sheepish. "Those validation routines you built were brilliant," he said. "I should have spoken up when Marcus started dismissing your concerns." "Next time, trust the technical assessment, not the loudest voice in the room," I suggested gently. By 7 p.m., the immediate crisis had passed. The system was functioning normally with enhanced monitoring, and all my original validation checks reinstated. I finally had a moment to process the day's events. In the span of 14 hours, I had gone from being marginalized and threatened with termination to being promoted to an executive position. As I gathered my things to finally go home, Jennifer stopped by my desk. "The board wants your security review to start immediately," she said. "You will have whatever resources you need." "I will have a plan ready by tomorrow morning," I promised. "And Rebecca," she added, "for what it is worth, I wish I had paid attention to your concerns earlier. I let myself get too disconnected from the technical details." "We all have lessons to learn from this," I replied diplomatically. As I left the building that night, I passed Marcus's office. He was still there, packing his personal items into a box. Our eyes met briefly through the glass wall. He gave a small, resigned nod, which I returned before continuing to the elevator. The 14 minutes that brought down the system had changed both our careers permanently in opposite directions. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, only validation of a principle I had always believed in. In critical systems, there are no acceptable shortcuts in data integrity. The next morning, I arrived early to find an email from the CEO requesting a meeting. He wanted to discuss the announcement of my new role and the communication strategy to reassure clients. It felt surreal, this sudden transition from ignored whistleblower to executive leadership. Over the following weeks, I led a comprehensive security review of all company systems. Many of the issues I identified were quickly addressed with newfound corporate enthusiasm for data integrity. I was given a team of security specialists and the authority to implement changes without bureaucratic delays. The Anderson project was relaunched 1 month later this time, with all my validation systems fully implemented and extensive testing before deployment. The client banks, initially shaken by the failure, were reassured by the transparent communication about what had gone wrong and the steps taken to prevent recurrence. As for Marcus, he remained with the company, but in a role far removed from critical systems. Occasionally I would see him in the cafeteria or hallways, but we rarely spoke. There was no animosity, just a professional recognition that his judgment had been catastrophically flawed in ways that could have destroyed the company. 6 months after the incident, I was asked to present at a financial technology conference about lessons learned from the Anderson project. Standing before hundreds of industry professionals, I shared the story of how 14 minutes of runtime nearly brought down a multi-million-dollar system and how proper data validation could have prevented it. The key lesson I concluded is that data integrity cannot be compromised for performance or deadlines. The cost of failure far exceeds any benefit from cutting those corners. The applause was gratifying, but not as much as the knowledge that our systems were now truly secure, with multiple layers of validation and comprehensive backup strategies. The board had learned its lesson too, prioritizing security over speed to market in all subsequent projects. As I left the stage, a young woman approached me. "Your talk was inspiring," she said. "I am facing similar resistance to security protocols at my company. How did you find the courage to stand your ground?" I thought about those months of isolation and doubt of being dismissed and undermined despite knowing I was right. "Trust your technical expertise," I told her. "Document everything. And if necessary, create your own backup plan. Sometimes being right is not enough, you also have to be prepared." She nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you. I hope I never need to save my company the way you did, but I will be ready if that day comes." And that, perhaps, was the most important resolution of all, the ripple effect beyond my own experience, influencing how the next generation of technical professionals would approach their responsibilities. In an industry where 14 minutes of runtime could destroy millions of dollars of value integrity, both personal and data, was everything. A year has passed since those 14 minutes that changed everything. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, while other days, the memory of watching those error alerts cascade across my screen remains vivid. The Anderson Project is now a case study in both technical failure and organizational recovery taught in business schools and technical training programs alike. The changes at FinSecure Solutions have been profound and lasting. The data security protocols I implemented have become company standard, with multiple validation layers and comprehensive backup strategies mandatory for all systems. Weekly security reviews ensure that shortcuts are never taken with critical safeguards regardless of deadline pressure. Marcus remains with the company, though our paths rarely cross. His reassignment to business analytics was a significant demotion, but the board decided that termination would send the wrong message about accountability and learning from mistakes. In a surprising development, he recently approached me to apologize properly, away from the crisis atmosphere of that day. I let delivery pressure cloud my technical judgment, he admitted during our brief coffee meeting, and I allowed my ego to dismiss valid concerns from someone with more relevant expertise. I appreciated his honesty, though the professional damage he had caused could not be easily forgotten. Technical decisions should be based on evidence and expertise, not hierarchy, I replied. He nodded. A lesson I learned at considerable cost. My promotion to Chief Data Security Officer came with substantial challenges. Building a department from scratch, establishing new company-wide protocols, and regaining client trust required months of intensive effort. But it also brought unexpected rewards beyond the obvious career advancement. I now lead a team of 15 security specialists, many of them women, I actively recruited from technical backgrounds. Creating opportunities for talented professionals who might otherwise be overlooked has become a personal mission. Stephanie joined my team as deputy director, her loyalty during the crisis not forgotten. The banking clients who initially threatened to leave after the system failure have become our strongest advocates, impressed by the transparency of our recovery and the robust security now embedded in every process. 2 additional major banks have signed contracts specifically citing our enhanced data integrity measures as a key factor in their decision. On a personal level, the experience transformed how I approach professional challenges. I no longer doubt my technical judgment when faced with resistance, having seen the consequences of compromised standards. But I have also learned more effective ways to communicate technical concerns to non-technical stakeholders, translating abstract risks into concrete business impacts they can understand. Perhaps the most significant lesson was the importance of creating personal backup plans in professional situations. My hidden backup system saved not just data, but an entire company and my own career. Sometimes following the official process is not enough, and personal initiative becomes necessary. The company culture has shifted dramatically, where speed and feature delivery once dominated, quality and security now share equal priority. The board established a technical oversight committee that reviews all major system changes, ensuring that expert voices are heard regardless of their position in the management hierarchy. I recently spoke with Catherine, the friend who advised me to stay through the launch rather than resign in protest. You were right, I told her. Being there to implement the solution was crucial both for the company and for my career. You created your own vindication, she replied. Most people would have just complained or quit. There have been other unexpected outcomes. Several former team members have approached me to apologize for not supporting my concerns more vocally. I knew you were right about the validation requirements, James admitted during one such conversation, but I was afraid of crossing Marcus. Courage is contagious, I told him. Next time, one voice of support might help others speak up too. This experience has made me reflect deeply on the balance between team loyalty and professional integrity. Both are important values, but when they conflict, technical truth must prevail, especially in systems where failure impacts thousands or millions of people. I now mentor junior engineers, particularly women, in navigating similar situations. Document everything I advise them. Build alliances with technical peers. And always have a backup plan for your career, just as you would for critical data. The 14 minutes of system runtime that revealed catastrophic flaws have become something of a legend in the company. New employees hear the story during orientation as a cautionary tale about the importance of data integrity and listening to technical expertise regardless of source. The backup system that saved the company has been formalized into our standard architecture with multiple redundant recovery options and regular restoration drills to ensure readiness. What Marcus once dismissed as a waste of server space is now considered essential infrastructure worth every byte of storage and processing cycle. I sometimes wonder how things might have unfolded if the system had not failed so spectacularly. Would my concerns have continued to be dismissed? Would I have eventually resigned in frustration? The crash was professionally vindicating, but the risks to clients and the company were never what I wanted. The ideal scenario would have been for my warnings to be heeded before deployment, avoiding the crisis entirely, but organizations like people sometimes learn most effectively from painful experience rather than preventive wisdom. As I look toward the future, I feel a renewed sense of purpose in my work. Protecting data integrity is not just a technical function, but an ethical responsibility when that data represents people's financial security, medical information, or other critical aspects of their lives. The 14 minutes that brought down a multi-million-dollar system taught me that technical expertise must be coupled with moral courage, that sometimes being right is not enough without the determination to stand firm in the face of pressure and dismissal. For those watching this who might face similar situations in your own careers, remember that your technical judgment has value even when others fail to recognize it. Document your concerns, build allies where possible, create your own backups when necessary, and never compromise on core principles of quality and security. Have you ever had to stand your ground on a technical issue when others dismissed your concerns? Or created a backup plan that later saved the day? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more professional insights and share with colleagues who might be facing similar challenges. Remember that sometimes the most important validation comes not from others, but from knowing you upheld your professional standards even when it was difficult. Thank you for listening to my story. May your systems always run smoothly, your backups remain unnecessary but ready, and your professional integrity guide you through whatever challenges arise in your own career journey.